What's up, YouTube? My name is John Brooks, and I'm a documentary filmmaker from the United States, currently living in Lisbon, Portugal. Today, I'm going to share with you my experiences on shooting my first documentary film, which was called 19 Shades of Black. Now, I've always been interested in filmmaking and editing since junior high school, but I never really had the opportunity to work in that medium. I actually started on 35mm film photography back in high school and college, but gave that up once the purchasing and processing of film became more expensive as people moved into the digital age. I actually decided to go back to school in 2015 to study filmmaking, and I did so in Budapest, Hungary at the Budapest Film Academy. And it was at that point in my life that I realized how much I didn't know about filmmaking. Prior to that, I bought a video camera, bought the Panasonic HPX 170, and I was shooting music videos and doing some industrial work for people, relying on my photographic eye, if you will. But I didn't know anything about sound or lighting techniques or real film composition. I was just going on like gut instinct. But when I went to film school, I realized a couple of things. One, you can't do everything yourself, and there's more to filmmaking than just point and shoot. And there were a lot of films being made in Hungary. DaVinci Codes were there, several other films, and there was a lot of opportunity for film students to watch Hollywood productions. Also at that time, because there were so many films being made there, they had actually run out of professionals to be part of the filmmaking process there. And some of the productions actually came to the film school and recruited film students to help out in various jobs. And I was this close to being hired to work on the DaVinci Codes. Didn't get that opportunity though. But Ron Howard did give a lecture to the film students one day, and we all went there and heard him talk about his career and what it's like being a filmmaker, and how he really didn't think he was a good actor, and that directing is always what he wanted to do. Yeah, it was a very enlightening process. So after a year of sort of like practicing my craft on the things I learned in film school, I decided to up the game and buy a real cinema type camera. So I purchased the Ursa Mini Pro 4.6K and a set of Rokinon lenses, and little by little I started buying, boom mics and C-stands and gels and lights and just to sort of build up my little kit of production equipment. And I knew I had to like keep filming, otherwise everything I had learned in Budapest, I was soon going to forget it. So I was totally into narrative filmmaking, and I remembered something my cinematographer teacher told me when I told him this idea for this film I wanted to make. He says, "That's a good idea. I think you should shoot it as a documentary." And I said, "Yeah, but I kind of want it to be narrative film." And he says, "You could always make a narrative film out of a documentary. Go there, document the people, document their stories, and you can still take what you learn there and write a script from it." Oh, that's a good idea. So the idea I had for shooting this film, this documentary narrative, was in Poland, and the person that was going to help me on it ended up getting pregnant, so I didn't have any interpreter, so I couldn't go shoot that film. I had to come up with a different idea. So I decided to shoot a film on Black women in the United States, on what it meant to be Black in the USA, and a woman. And here's what I said on a trailer I made.
19 Shades of Black came about because as a Black man growing up in the late 1950s, I knew what it was like for me. The racism that was encountered, the systemic racism, the implicit bias, the standard of beauty always revolved around being white. And in order to survive in this society, from my eyes, it looked like Black women, a few, were trying to embrace that narrative, to see what it's like to be a woman, if you will. But I didn't know, so I wanted to ask the question, and the only way I can get that question answered was to ask them.
So I wrote out the questions that I wanted to ask and ended up setting up the studio in my house. which was the easy part. And then I had to go find women to interview for this project. So I started with women that I knew. And then if I was out and about, either at a club or on the street or something, I would see someone that I thought was interesting, and I would pitch the idea to them. These are people I didn't know, and surprisingly, most of them said yes. You know, hey, would you like to come be in a film in my house, you know? But they were cool with it. So originally, I wanted the title to be 15 Shades of Black, but I interviewed more than 15 women, sort of as a buffer, to make sure that I had good, compelling stories, that they all tied into one another, because my plan was to sort of make these women speak sort of as one voice, and the story would go, they would all go together. They would all be the main characters, actually. But all of the stories were compelling, and I couldn't, it was hard for me to cut out some of their voices. So even though I was sort of sold on the idea of 15 shades, I decided to change it to 19 shades. Not because 19 meant anything to me, other than it rolled off the tongue, 19 Shades of Black. And then a friend of mine pointed out, who was in the film, she said, well, you know, 1916 was when slavery in the United States, blah, blah, blah. And I thought, okay, it could work. So I did that. But it turns out I interviewed 24 women. I didn't realize that until after the film was done. So they all opened up to me. Even the women I had just met, they opened up, and they were very vulnerable. Some women even cried, as if they were waiting for someone to come ask them this question. What's it like being a Black woman in the United States today? I'll never forget, when I was living in Washington, D.C., I was part of a nonprofit group called Operation Understanding. And that was a group that was trying to bring the Black community, the Black American community, and the American Jewish community together to understand their common bonds and things the struggles they have done together throughout the history of the United States. And we were interviewing young kids, I think it was high school age, sponsor them to go on a trip to Gambia. I think it was Gambia or Ghana, I don't remember which country it was, and to Israel. And so we were interviewing them. It was a panel thing, and there's one woman came in, I'll never forget it, young girl, wasn't a woman. And when she walked in, she was just full of life, smiling, she just radiated, you know, the room and stuff like that. So we're asking her these questions. And there was a question that was something along the line, have you ever encountered racism, you know, or something like that. She was smiling and says, well, actually, there was this one time I was in grade school, and she told a story about how her classmate had wet on herself in the class, and people were laughing, and then the teacher tried to quiet him down, and she said this teacher never really liked her. She was the only Black girl in the class, because this was in the Midwest, somewhere in the United States. I think it was Kansas, I don't remember exactly, but somewhere in the Midwest. And then instead of telling the young girl to clean it up, or having the janitor or somebody come in, she told this woman, let's call her Sarah. She said, Sarah, get down there and clean it up. And she said, but I didn't do it. She says, yeah, but you made her do it. You know, and she didn't, of course. So she humiliated her in front of the class and made her get down there and clean the other person's mess up. And kids were laughing and stuff. And as she told this story, she started to cry. And we all were like, wow, this is deep. And then she composed herself and said, well, but that was in the past. And she just like had this positive attitude, but she was burying this pain deep down inside. You can see that if it affected me, you know, because I still remember this. And so this is something that she has to carry with herself her entire life. She's never going to forget that. And like in my story, a lot of the women had similar stories to that, which they have been carrying their entire life, but just trying to deal with it. But let me tell you the issues I had. So the easy part was actually setting up the questions, getting the women to be interviewed, and setting up the studio. The hard part was actually shooting the film, because I had to be everything. Again, that lesson I learned in film school was you can't do everything yourself, but here I was still trying to do everything myself. I was the producer, I was the cameraman, I was the host, I was the makeup, the lighting tech, you know, all this stuff, sound, and I was new at all of this. I remember setting up the tungsten lights, which were very hot, and that room was hot because it was summertime, and so women would come in there and it would heat up so quickly that sometimes a woman would be sweating. And so I felt compelled to like, all right, we need to continue this through, because they were on a roll on some of the questions. I didn't have a lot of time to be real leisurely with them. Going back to looking at YouTube on how to set up lights and stuff like that, yeah, it didn't really work for me. Every time, this is no kidding, but every time I set up, even though I didn't move the lights, but every time I set it up, I got different lighting. It was crazy. Even though they were in the same position. All right, so sometimes I use different lenses. I mixed between 35 and a 50mm lens because I wasn't sure the kind of look I wanted or how I wanted to frame them. So I was experimenting and shooting the film at the same time. I didn't have a set plan on the look I wanted. I knew I wanted a black backdrop, but setting up a 3-point lighting system and all that, it never really worked. Sometimes I had lens flares, sometimes I had spill on the backdrop, and I didn't know where it was coming from. So I had this dummy that I'd sit in the chair and I'd set up stuff before I know how it's going to look, so I would save time when the talent came in. But then when they got in, it was like, oh no, there's not enough light, or there's too much light, da 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 da. Because I was dependent a lot on my eye rather than the scopes, because that's what I used to do with 35mm photography. And even though the scopes were telling me one thing, my eyes didn't believe it. So I would like open the aperture up as opposed to turning the ISO up. So I had a lot of light with a very shallow depth of field, which I really didn't want, but I didn't know how to brighten up the picture. Because again, I didn't know what I didn't know, right? I would ask the women like, okay, so sit, do you move a lot when you talk? And they go, no, I just stand still. Well, that was a lie, because once they got into it, they're like, all like this. And then sometimes they're leaning in and then boom, shallow depth of field, they're out of focus, like, oh, I couldn't stop. I could have stopped them, but I didn't. I just let it roll. And then the chair was squeaky at times, this is kind of important stuff, it's like I had a director's chair and they would move around it. Yeah, lessons learned, man, I'll tell you. And then I try to take that information to the next interview, but then I have a new set of problems come up. But the main one was the lights. So it really, but instead of stopping, because I didn't want to be in a situation where I'm killing their time, right? They're doing me a favor. They're on a roll. I felt if I would, oh, wait a minute, stop, let me set this up. Oh, this isn't right, da 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 da. You kind of get them out of the mood, I wanted them in and out, telling a story. And so I had to deal with all that in post, hoping that I could fix it. But again, I didn't know how compelling this story was going to turn out. So I really wasn't as concerned as making a real documentary that I'm going to submit to festivals, as opposed to just making a documentary for practice, right? That was my original intent, making a documentary to practice so I get better at filmmaking. DaVinci Resolve, I was using Premiere before that, but this is like DaVinci Resolve 15, and it had gotten a lot better on the editing page, right? So I just abandoned Premiere Pro and started just doing everything in DaVinci Resolve. I didn't know anything about color correction, being a colorist, or any of that kind of stuff. I was pretty much just an editor. But again, I was looking at online classes and listening to what other people were saying and da 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 da. So I had built up some kind of skills on how I wanted to set this up. The other thing is, people were saying, oh yeah, ProRes. I could have shot this in RAW, and I wish I had of, because ProRes did not give me a lot of latitude that I wanted to change things on the mistakes I made. So if I had to do it over again, I would have shot all that in RAW, because that's all I shoot now is RAW. ProRes, I don't even deal with it. Because every woman was shot differently, even though they were in the same location, I had to come up with something where they're all blending together, where it all looks the same, right? Because I couldn't have different shades of black for every woman. So I had to blend it to where the background was a really crushed type of black, which meant sometimes the woman wasn't separated from the background. Sometimes I was getting this lens spill / flare coming in, and I'm looking, where is this light coming from? I couldn't figure it out because I didn't know a lot back then. Looking back, I totally learned from it, but again, instead of stopping, I just shot it. Okay, I'm just gonna shoot it. But eventually what happened was the entire film came out darker than I wanted it to. I could only lighten it up so much without because my skills, again, as an editor weren't that good. So, I mean, if I go back and do it now, I could probably fix a lot of that better than what I did for the final version. But, you know, you are where you are at any point in time in your life, and that's where I was. The only thing I did do right or didn't mess up was sound. You know, like I said, I bought that boom pole and the boom mic, and that was stationary. So all the levels on the women were pretty much even, except during editing, it sounded differently. You know, like some women were higher, some were lower, and I couldn't figure it out. And I was always readjusting, trying to get them to match. And it turns out, because I use that computer for things other than editing, or I was turning the volume on the computer up and down, and so it was never at the same level. So I was listening to the computer sound volume rather than really paying attention to the scopes. I could see the scopes, they're in the yellow, but I couldn't hear it. So because I'm dyslexic, I would turn it up and it's now in the red. It wasn't peaking, but it was in the red. And so I was constantly doing this every time I was going into editing, not understanding that everything was cool. It was me that was messing this up. But it turns out that in the end, I did have a really nice, even sound level for all the women, except for some peaks. But again, since I'm a product of the 70s and I grew up doing network TV, a program level would be at this level, and then when a commercial came up, it would be higher. And that's how I was setting up my transition. So I would have one segment of an interview at this level, and then I try to wake you up with the montage of footage and sound. Most of the music in there was friends that had written things for me that I would add in there, other than the Nina Simone thing. And it was higher, so I would shock you. I would totally do that differently. I would just have it all at one even level. I had all the footage, I had all the interviews, I knew where I wanted to start, where I wanted to end, except I didn't know how I wanted to start the film and how to end the film. Fortunately, I was shooting prior to that on my camcorder a segment on YouTube that I called Travelers. So I was running Airbnb at my house, and I was letting couch surfers come over, and I would ask some of the guests from time to time if I could interview them on why they travel, especially the ones from different countries coming to the United States. So I called it Travelers. And I'll have each one of them start by saying,
"My name is Maria Agustina."
And my name is Georgia, and this is our story.
I kind of took that with these interviews with the women, and I said, you know, standard, okay, please say your name and spell it, so I'll have it. And then I said, now I want you to have a conversation with me. I'm not going to speak, so I want you to try to incorporate the question in your answer. I'll be just off camera, you look at me, it's just me and you, and the camera is an observer. But I want you to start by saying, hi, my name is blank, and this is my story, and then go into how you were raised, or brothers and sisters, what your family life is, what, you know, I maybe put one or two questions together so they keep rolling. So each woman that came in, they would say, hi, my name is Rachel, and this is my story. Hi, my name is Jasmine, this is my story. I decided to start like that.
My name is Rachel, and this is my story.
My idea was to have these women speak with one voice, because this was a common thing, and I believed when I was writing this, that probably happened to the majority of Black women in the United States. I wanted to put the commonalities together and have you see one character. This is the character of the story. So in order to do that, I thought, okay, if I introduce them all in the beginning, you're able to make a better connection. So they all said, hi, my name is Rachel. Hi, my name is Jasmine. Hi, my name is Milan, blah, blah, blah. I cut out this is my story, but that's how I did it. And I did it to the background music of one of my favorite artists, Nina Simone, a song called For Women, which is a powerful song if you haven't heard it. I'll put a link in the description box so you can listen to it if you haven't already. And then I blended with historical footage that I have from my family from back in, back in the day, like way back in the day. And then some historical footage from like the National Archives and some of the Mississippi and Alabama, places like that I got the rights to. And then went into the first interview. I just blended that. You're showing women from the past to the present, and then boom, the first interview. And she starts, I grew up in New Jersey, da da da, blah blah blah, and then the next one would come in and sort of continue that. Hi, I'm from here. This is how I was raised, and so you kind of get the flow of how they're speaking with one voice. And I showed this to a couple of friends of mine who generally don't like the work I do, where they liked it, and I was like, okay, maybe I'm onto something here. So I kept it like that, and then I had to decide how I was going to end it. I decided to do the same thing. End it the way I began, with women speaking with one voice. You'd already been introduced to them, so you know who they are, but obviously I couldn't put all 19 or 24 because I ended up with 24 women on there. So I picked select women to say certain things that had said powerful things also in the story. And that's how I ended it. It came out pretty good. I was happy with it, right? So not only was I able to practice my art, I actually made a very compelling story. I ended up entering it in film festivals, I think 16 festivals. I placed in 6 official selection. I was able to win 1, and I had one finalist and 1 semi-finalist. So for my first time out, I also got Best Upcoming Director or Honorable Mention or something like that. And I was like, okay, this is cool. Was able to practice my craft and spill that into the next film that I was going to make, which was during the pandemic. I was working for a theater company called Moxie Theater, and like all theater companies, they all shut down during the pandemic because, again, you can't have live audiences. So we decided to do a play. They were doing Zoom plays, which was very successful on Zoom, but they decided, let's shoot a play in the theater for an audience of 1, facing the camera. And I always wanted to do this too because it's different. Watching a play is different than watching a drama on TV, because on TV, we tell you what we want you to look at. We tell you how to follow the story. But in a play, you're seeing everything and you decide what you want to look at when you want to look at it. This person may be talking over here, but maybe you're interested in this character over there because you see something going on. So we actually shot the play as a play. And then they wanted me to document that whole process of trying to make art during the times of COVID. That's what the play is called. That's online too. If you want to see that, I'll also put a link in the description box of what it was like for them doing that, because, you know, they were outside their comfort zone. And I'm sort of getting off track because that's another story. But the point is, I was able to take the mistakes I made in 19 Shades of Black and not duplicate them into the next one. It's a learning process. The more you shoot, the better you get. Whether you learn on your own or you learn from others or through school, you have to go out and practice this so you don't make the mistakes again. Or if something comes up, you understand, aha, I've seen this before. I know why this is a lens flare in my camera, because I don't have a lens hood on it and it's coming from that light. So I learned a lot. It was a very arduous process, but a lot of fun. I mean, my skills in shooting got better, my skills on interviewing got better, my skills on editing totally got better. So I'll be happy to put a link for this film, which I have on YouTube now, in the description box. Also, I'll link to some of the featurettes, because there were some things they said that didn't really fit in the story, but were really deep. I did have an offer from a streaming service to actually pick it up, but I no longer own the rights to the Nina Simone song, and I can't get them again, so I couldn't sell it to them. If you've got an idea for a documentary, my advice to you is to go ahead and shoot it. If you don't have a good camera, that doesn't matter. Just shoot it on your phone. Just make sure your sound's good and practice your craft. Feel free to share with us your comments on lessons you've learned on your own films, or things that I've said that may have been useful or totally off base. Yeah, let's all learn together. Cheers.